The Pacers have double-digit wins for the first time consecutively this season. Are they inconsistent, or is that separate from bad in any way? Plus, thoughts on Myles Turner in a discussion with Derek Schultz on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What up, y'all? Happy Thursday, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes, and today, Pacers back in action. They play the Suns, but we must look back before we look forward, and Derek Schultz is going to help us do that today. Of Query and Schultz, the IBJ, many other places. A lot to dive into. I want to talk about, does double-digit wins consecutively actually mean anything? Yes. Before you say it, it's been against bad teams. We get into that in the discussion. Plus, is there a difference with this Pacers team between inconsistent and bad? That can be a fine line for bad or not bad teams. We also talk some Myles Turner, what's made his season feel different than past seasons, and many other things, because Derek is the best. His mic was not plugged in for his first time speaking, and then after that, it sounds great. So bear with us on that, but great episode. Lots of great discussions. Let's just jump right in. For the first time since the day after the Pacers signed James Wiseman, he's back. It's Mr. Derek Schultz. Used to be a radio star here in Indy, still is via Query and Schultz, and is gracious enough to give me his time once every 6 months when I beg to hear his lovely voice again. Derek, how are you doing, sir? I saw you were at Pacers Pelicans, the first Pacers, like, wow, they actually crushed somebody of the season. They did it.
Yeah, it was great. You know, Pacers are doing, this is so cheeseball. Pacers are doing their Gold Friday deals. And I'm like, I'm just going to check it out, right? And the seats are $5. And it's a random draw game for this, because you didn't know, right? It was the in-season tournament game that wasn't announced, right? The open date or whatever. And I looked at our December slate and I was like, well, like, you know, I got flexibility, I got time and whatever. I'll just take James, and they're $5 for an NBA game. I got a parking pass on the Circle. So no parking, and the concessions are pretty reasonable at Bankers Life, and we went, and really happy to see a win. I'm glad that I didn't pay $5 to see him the Charlotte game, you know what I mean, or something like that.
But Charlotte game,
yeah. But you know, in a business where you're used to like calling up a friend and getting freebies and stuff like that, I do like to try to be like a paying customer to the teams that I cover sometimes and talk about sometimes. So yeah, this was a nice way to get that done, and also see the blue and gold get a victory.
Have a little bit of fun. Yeah. Charlotte is funny to talk about because I was actually texting with someone today. If the Pacers were 500, not undefeated, 500 against Charlotte and Toronto this year, they'd have a winning record, which is just crazy. I can't believe I have to say that out loud.
Yeah, you know, it's maddening. It really is. I mean, they beat both of last year's NBA Finals participants, right? And then you turn around and what have they lost to Charlotte? Have they lost to Charlotte like a half a dozen times? It feels like in the last couple of, I mean, it's crazy.
I tweeted this after their last loss. There's something like 5-14 in their last night or something. I can't. That's not exactly right, but it's close to that. Like it's like insane how bad they've been against the Hornets.
It's like always, and they've had a lot of bad losses. Like we took James to the Orlando game early in the season last year, where
they were down 40 at like halftime.
It was literally, you know, and the NBA is not like this, right? Where you're down 30 and then you cut it to 12 at one point. Like they were down 30 points the entire game, basically, until like the final like 4 minutes of the fourth quarter. And so, you know, you have bad losses all year long, or one-sided losses, but it just seems like Charlotte, you remember the Charlotte ones. Like those are the, oh my God, emergency Locked On Pacers pod. What is wrong with the state of the franchise right now? Losses.
So I actually want to talk about their two most recent wins, not because they beat good teams. The Pelicans really stink, and the Sixers had their 3 stars, but have never gotten anything going this year. But the last time, so they won 2 in a row. If they had beat Charlotte, they'd have won 4 in a row right now. The last time they had any sort of like sustained success was that homestand they had where they beat 3 terrible teams like 2 weeks ago, right? But all those games were close. Like they were clawing it out against the Wizards and the Blazers, and I forget who the third one was against. And I talked to JMV on this podcast right after that, and I said, like, do you feel good about this right now? Like, do you feel like there's actually any sort of substantial progress to see them winning because they hadn't been winning? Or is these are so close, do you feel bad about it? And then they got steamrolled by Detroit that Friday. But what we both said was like, they still haven't to this point just crushed somebody or like had wire to wire, like you feel really good about how they played the whole game, maybe the Dallas game, but that was it. And now I feel like they have done that twice in a row. I will say their opponent these last 2 games again was not good teams, but they played bad teams prior to that and have not done this, right? So I'm curious if you feel like the fact that half of their double-digit wins on the season, I think 3 of their 4 are their last 3 wins. Like, does this actually mean something to you, or are they just hot against bad teams? Like, have you actually noticed signs of progress recently, or am I grasping for something here?
No, I think you've seen, even if you haven't necessarily seen it team-wide, I think you've seen some individual signs of progress. Tyrese Haliburton is starting to come up again and look like his old self a little bit. Obi Toppin's, we're talking about a small sample, but, in the first couple of weeks of December has been much better. And, some of it is, right, make or miss league. Sometimes, your shots are falling now. He's not he's not being able to, unable to throw it in the ocean like he was early in the season. And that's starting to fall for him. But I think individually you've got to be a little bit encouraged. But I think the reason why, you're right. I mean, that Pelicans team is really bad. And the Sixers are just whatever. That's one of those teams that looks like the plane's just not going to get off the runway as far as this season is concerned. But the Hornets loss and really that stretch leading up into it, I mean, the alarm bells were really ringing. And I don't want to say it's a crisis point on December 10th or whatever it is. It's a marathon, not a sprint and all of that in the NBA season. But you were starting to wonder, oh my God, like, is this what this team is going to be this year? Are there real problems? And I understand the injury situation and some of the things that they've had to go through that they weren't planning on going into this year. But all the talk in the offseason was about, worst case scenarios, and this being like the 2021 Hawks all over again. And, you were worried about that, right? Yeah, you were worried about that coming to fruition in the first 6 weeks or so of the season. So, yeah, it's the Pelicans and the Sixers, and they stink. But good basketball is better than bad basketball. That's always been my take. And the Pacers hadn't necessarily been taking care of business, at least not consistently, against bad teams either. And also, I think what impressed me, Tony, particularly like, let's go back to the Pelicans game, was that they were never not in control of that game.
Yes.
And even when, I think in the third quarter, the Pelicans started making shots and started kind of, kicking things up offensively. The Pacers defensively, things were getting away from them, but offensively, things were maintaining. What we've seen sometimes with this team is that when one side collapses, the other side collapses, and then they both, simultaneously, and it's bad. And I think you saw them just kind of like keep the ship steady, if you will, even if they were taking on a little bit of water. And I think too often this team hasn't been great at doing that. So I'm not real worried about style points right now. What I'm worried about is just kind of surviving this, getting Aaron Nesmith back, and really kind of getting this thing back on track. I think the problem that they're approaching here is this Western trip's going to be very tricky, and then the end of the month schedule is brutal, right? So they're out of their I don't want to say easy stretch because nothing is easy for the Indiana Pacers, but they're out of this kind of gimme stretch where 2 out of the next 3 nights you're playing teams that have no chance of doing anything this season.
There are no gimmies for the Pacers, but there also are no games that they have no chance in, which is just like, how do you cover a team like that? So the thing that I think you nailed kind of how I feel about their 2 most recent games is like, the more important thing is collectively, individually, it feels like lots of guys are making important strides. Nembhard had 2 really good games in a row, which I think made their starting 5 look more potent than it has basically the entire season. Haliburton has looked good for, I'll say, 10 games, basically, where he's like, yeah, that's the guy from 2 years ago. Not last year, but 2 years ago. Toppin is crushing in December. The shots are going in, but also his per-game rebounding numbers are higher than any single game he had before December. Like, he's just smashing on the glass. All these things mattered a lot for them when it felt like every game, what I talked about Kalen Cooper for a long time was they had a different problem all the time. And that's like a symptom of all these guys playing so inconsistently. So it's like, oh, finally the bench is good. Oh, and Tyrese Haliburton had 4 points, or, oh, Myles Turner was in foul trouble, or, oh, they had nothing on the wing defensively because they don't have anybody available, or like, oh, Mathurin and Haliburton couldn't stop a potted plant tonight. Like there's something different every game. And so I do think that for me personally, I kept saying, like, I need to see them just crush somebody, right? Like, that would be a sign to me that they can at least put together a 48-minute game where they're playing with purpose and execute a game plan. Like, and people are right to say this. They'll say it was the Pelicans and the Sixers. Yes, that's true. Guess what? They already lost to both of those teams this year, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's still something that they did much better than that. Like, that alone is a sign of progress to me. And they lost to a worse version of the Sixers at home. At least the Pelicans team they lost to was like, had Zion and Ingram playing. So in some ways, I feel like these two games are like the best I've felt about watching the team win a game, even though the context of those wins is extremely unimpressive. And it won't matter at all if the Suns just completely kick their stuff in tonight. But I think that I feel like this time off and this practice stuff and just the amount of purpose it feels like they're playing with offensively right now makes me feel a little better. But I need to see it against someone good. And the Suns and the Warriors and the Kings are like good enough to feel like they are the opponents that would reach that threshold to me, but they have to do it. And yes, they've beaten Boston and Dallas, but they've also been completely embarrassed by some awful or good teams recently. So like Memphis was their last good opponent they played, and they scored 45 points in the first quarter of that game and still lost by 18. So they really need to continue these chops on this road trip, I think, for people to feel good. But I do think that they've showed a lot of progress on the team and individual level recently in a way that they didn't during their last winning streak.
Yeah, and I think the timing, you had mentioned, what is this stretch, 3 games in 12 days? I mean, this is about as close to a break as an NBA team would get. And I know you don't want to enter that by losing to the Charlotte Hornets, but the fact that that real panic loss didn't come in a stretch where you were playing 4 games in 7 nights, I think actually benefited them, because it was a chance for them to just kind of catch their breath and be like, all right, hold up, like, what's happening here? Like, what are we doing? Like, let's kind of figure some things out and let's kind of smooth some things out. Even though I do think individually, like you had mentioned, like Tyrese Haliburton and Obi Toppin and some of these other, and, you get Nembhard back in the lineup, some of these other things were happening at that time. That just felt like one of the first, and there are many of these during the NBA season, one of the first, like, kind of critical crossroads juncture points of the year, and so far so good, albeit against 2 bad teams. Maybe I'll feel differently if they go 0-for on this little mini Western swing here that they're about to embark on. But I agree with you. I just think the ship was taking on water, and you needed to steady it, and at least through this week they've steadied that for now.
Everyone, short little break here. We got to talk about 2 awesome groups of people. First up, the good folks over at BILT. Today's episode sponsored by BILT Rewards. If you're a renter, listen up. There's a total game changer. Thanks to BILT, you can now earn points on rent payments just like you do with groceries or travel. Paying rent now comes with serious perks, and it's completely free to join. You can earn valuable BILT points on your rent and everyday spending. No extra cost. Redeem points for flights, hotel stays, or even future rent payments. Over 500 airlines and 700,000 hotels in their program. Endless possibilities. Access unique experiences that are exclusive to BILT members. You can use it for travel. You can turn it into rewards. If you're paying rent, why not make it work for you? Start earning points on rent you're already paying by going to joinbuilt.com/LockedOnNBA. That's joinbuilt, BILT.com/LockedOnNBA. Make sure to use our link so they know we sent you. Don't wait. Start earning rewards. Today, we also need to talk about the good folks over at Game Time, the best way to get tickets to the sports, comedy, theater, whatever you're going to near you. They're all about togetherness this holiday season, and you can bring people together at live events. And Game Time Picks, one of their new features, makes getting those tickets even easier. They filter out the fluff and only show you the incredible deals on great seats. That way you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. But if you do decide to do that, you'll find great things on Game Time. There's super deals. They're curated deals that make it easier to find the best price. You can customize your spot with certain features. You have seat views in the arena before you buy. It was spot on when I used it at Barclays Center. They have their lowest price guarantee, event cancellation protection, and job loss protection. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account, terms apply, and spell out that code LOCKEDONNBA when you're redeeming a code for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Game time. I agree, and now I want to ask you a question I've had about this team. And I think this is a kind of a sports thing in general. I wrote this. I wrote that the Pacers should, about their inconsistency, and use numbers to back up why I'm using the word inconsistent instead of bad or good or whatever. And we'll get to that in just a second. But some people, I think rightly in a lot of cases, equate inconsistent to just bad, right? For a pro sports team. If you're a fan of the Wizards, you'd say, hey, we beat the Nuggets this year. We're just inconsistent, right? Look at our peak level. We could be contenders. We beat the Hawks twice. All right. And that's obviously not true. They're not inconsistent. They suck. They're the worst team in the NBA by like a pretty good margin this year. And so trying to toe that line has been really interesting to me because the Pacers have, I think what makes the Pacers unique, just like macro perspective for this question, is they have for a college term, like a very good resume of wins, right? Already. Knicks beat them, Magic beat them, Mavs beat them, Celtics beat them. Last year they did it to even more good teams, but this is the second straight year where they just like are colossally bad against bad teams for their quad 4 losses are stacking up. That's a thing, right? So before I get into like the weeds on why I think inconsistent does apply to them, like, do you equate those two words, or is there a way you can separate them? Like, is it just that they've been inconsistent and they have to find a way to be more consistent? That's what Pascal Siakam was talking about recently. He said we got to be more consistent on defense. Or is it actually that they're just bad and that's a result of being a bad team with some good players?
Yeah, here's my answer to that. And I'll flip it. I think you can be consistent and be bad. And I'll use an example here in town. The Colts are consistently bad against good teams and good against bad teams.
That's fair,
right.
Yeah.
So they're 1-7 against bad teams, and if they play the Patriots or the Jets or whatever, then yeah, they're going to win. Great. So yes, I think you can separate those things, even though I think bad teams are very often inconsistent and good teams are very often consistent, right? But I don't think it's like a black and white thing. Like, you are inconsistent, you are bad, you are consistent, you are good. Because you can consistently be good at doing bad.
Good answer.
You know what I mean?
Yes.
So yeah,
Yes.
I think the difference between inconsistent this year is that, like you said, you want to see the Pacers just go on and crush somebody. Like, I think outside of like the $130 that they dropped on the Knicks, whenever that was, outside of that, I haven't been like really like, whoa, with a lot of their performances this year. Whereas last year at this point, you were like, oh my God, like they were already in November, December, and through the NBA Cup, right, stacking up these really impressive performances with the bad losses. Whereas I think this year it's been more of the bad than the good, even though obviously you have, you beat Boston, you beat Dallas, you've got some good, you have some good wins that are mixed in there. So I think it's fine to be inconsistent, and fine is maybe not the right word. I think you can survive being inconsistent because we saw the Pacers just do that last year. It's maddening and frustrating and all of those things for the fans to not know what you're going to get on a given night. But I don't think it's a death sentence to be inconsistent. But if you ask Rick Carlisle and his staff, they would like them to be a little more consistent than they have been, especially against, the dregs of the NBA teams that really, it's fine to have a Hornets type performance 3 or 4 times in an 82 game season. If you're having that 10 to 12 times, then that's a problem.
You brought up the Colts, and I was going to ask you this, not recording, but screw it, I'll do it now. Did the AD Mitchell play, does that merit a new video for you to pin on Twitter? Does that replace the Patriots play?
I don't think anything will ever top the fake punt, but it's close, man. Because, it's just one of those things, like, it sounds cliche, right? It's slow motion train wreck. Like, you're watching that play. And I had to watch that play after the fact because, I came home and I'm going through this thing and it says it scored it as a fumble. So I'm going home and I'm like, wait, what? Donald Mitchell, so he caught the ball and then he fumbled and they scooped it up and they ran it back. I don't know. I was watching on the CBS Sports app. And then I get home and I realize it's a throw. And when I'm watching the throw happen, you see it in slow motion. Like, oh my God, like this disaster is about to strike. So yeah, rarefied air for the Pagano fake punt. But yeah, the AD Mitchell one is one. You're going to remember that play 5, 7, 10 years from now.
Yeah, there's some Colts moments that have happened while I'm at press row during a Pacers game that I'll remember, and that is for sure one of them. Tom Lewis put his hand on his head. I said, what happened? And he showed me the play. I was like, what? What were they even trying to do there? The Jeff Saturday introductory presser was during a Pacers game, and everybody on press row was watching that.
Yeah, that was a night to not forget. And you know what? It's maintained. It's stayed bad for them, and that's why this town needs the Pacers to be more consistent because for so long the inconsistent Pacers is like, all right, well the Colts are winning, whatever. Now we really need the balloon goal to be better than this.
So I'm going to use some arbitrary cutoffs, but this is what I wrote, and I'm going to now say it because I don't know if everybody read this. So when I wrote this was 5 days ago. They were 14th in the NBA in offensive rating at the time, about 1.14 points per possession, right? But at the time, they had 8 games with an offensive rating over 120 on the season. They're 7-1 in those games. All right. That's last year's Pacers. Sounds great, right? They had 9 games under 110. Guess how many of those they won? None. 0 of them. 0-9 in those 9 games. And so the takeaway from that is both that obviously scoring is important, but also 17 of their 26 games fit into either extreme, right? Yeah. Either like, awesome, they're scoring a lot and they won, or like, oh, they can't put the ball in the hoop at all and they lost. Last year, they only had 14 games the whole season where they had an offensive rating below 110. They're on pace for almost 28 this year. And last year, they hit the 120 mark 45 times. So they had 59 games last year where they hit one of the extremes, but 45 of them were the good extreme. So that's consistent, right? Usually you knew which end of the Pacers you're going to get. They're going to score a bunch that they lost is because they can't guard. This year it is which extreme they're going to go to is actually more surprising. Like, it's hard to know. And so that's why I think inconsistent is separate from bad, because they are still hitting peaks sometimes and they look really great in those games. They've only lost one of them. It was ironically to the Pelicans, but they have a lot of games where they can't even get close to it and they just have no chance, both because their defense isn't very good and because their identity is so much offensively based. So I think they are certainly inconsistent, like wildly so, but the fact that they're inconsistent on offense is the problem. And that's why people talk about them differentiating this from bad, because their whole identity is supposed to be they can score 130 all the time, and they've barely hit that at all this season. So they've just kind of been all over the place. And I think either of these realities would be good for them. Either getting back to last year's reality, where that was like 4 out of 5 times you had a game on the extreme, it was the good extreme, or just getting rid of those bad ones. Just have some average games for like a long time. Even that would go a long way for them, because they're like 500 in those games. That's not a good record, but they'll take that.
Yeah, and I think you've kind of pinpointed it. The reason why they're 12-15 where they sit where they are today is because, the defense has somewhat been similar, right, to last year. It's just that the offense is not elite it was last year. I mean, it was an elite offense last year over an 82-game season. And when you're not, having that come out in the wash that way, and you're less than on offense and the defense kind of remains the same, I think that's, where you find yourself in kind of a bad spot. But again, I do think, in small sample and all of that, I feel like I have to attach qualifiers on anything. I think the first couple of weeks of December have shown that maybe the Pacers are climbing back to that, and even the pace and things like the tempo and things like that, and getting Toppin back involved, and Tyrese maybe being less peak and valley and more, he had 20 points. He shot 3 of 7 from 3-point range, more normal numbers than 0 for 8, and he had 7 points and whatever else. I think you're starting to see them kind of slowly climb back to that, even if it's not, shifting it right into 5th gear and being what the offense was last year. It's better than what it was over the first 5 or 6 weeks of the season. Hopefully.
For sure. I think we'll learn, I'm making this up, but I think their next 9 games, what everybody says, is like the crazy part. If they go 4-5, that will feel bad because they'll be farther from 500, but they got to be thrilled by that, because then they have a chance in January to actually make that up to the point where they could get to somewhere important in the standings, right? And so to do that, they have to either hit the high extreme or like defend well enough, and I don't think anybody expects them to do that. So they're going to have to really click, and I think this practice time has helped. Perfect time to integrate Thomas Bryant and hopefully streamline some things offensively. But that's why I think I can separate them, because I can literally factually point to a number that says they've been so far from their average a lot this year, even though, like you said, it's been in a small sample. But I am not going to sit here and say people who just say inconsistent teams are bad are wrong. Like, I think in a lot of cases that is true. Yeah. Right. It's just like a rosy way of looking at a team. But I do think the Pacers have a unique reality that makes it true for them. One more break here, guys. We got to talk about the good people over at FanDuel. Get ready to tackle the NFL action. Jumping on some NBA hoops with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers on FanDuel can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get that hunch in the middle of a game, you know what's coming, you want to wager on it. Well, you can check out the latest stats. You can view live play-by-play and do so much more right on the same page where you would place your bets so you can be as informed as possible. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. Again, you'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. That is on FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. I'm going to ask you about only one player today specifically. That's Myles Turner, because I think a lot of fans have been really down on how he's played this year. And I keep walking away from games being like, yeah, Myles was fine. And then I look at his stats and I'm like, that's not very good. What do you think, just generically, what do you think of how he's played this year?
Yeah, I've been underwhelmed overall. I don't think it's been bad enough where you've been like necessarily concerned, like, oh my God, like what's up with Myles, right? Because like you said, I think it's one of those things where you're not really thinking about it while you're watching the game. And then you sort of look at, cumulatively what he's done this year and you realize that basically he's down everywhere, right? The points are down. Well, the turnovers are up. He's shooting the ball better from three, but he's taking about the same amount of shots and still struggling to get the scoring average up compared at least to the last 2 or 3 seasons. So I do wonder. We've the whole thing. I'll make the worst analogy ever, Tony, which I try to do every time that I'm invited on the show. we have my uncle, my mom's sister's husband, my Uncle Dan, a great guy, right? And he lives out of town. He actually lives in Cooperstown, New York, where the Baseball Hall of Fame is. And whenever they come in, the joke that we always have is that anytime Uncle Dan's there, the first thing he tells you is exactly when he's leaving. And, hey, it's great to be here. Hoping you take me back to the airport, on Friday. Yeah. Okay, Uncle Dan, that's 10 days away, whatever. Like I will take you to the airport eventually. I feel like the entire 10 years that Myles Turner has been here, we've been just focused on his departure. You know what I mean? Like, okay, well, yeah, the Pacers have to make a decision on Myles Turner on this date, and that probably means that he's gone. So I don't want to do that for like the 10th straight year where we're talking about,
no trades today.
I don't want to do that, but obviously, like my Uncle Dan, like that's always kind of hanging out there, right? With Myles Turner, especially in a year like this one, and where the Pacers have, they paid a lot of guys already, and they're going to have to make a decision on what they're going to do. So, I think, he's fine. I think is a fair summation. That's probably simplistic. But I don't know if he's fine is, if that's what it's going to be when you have to get to that point where you have to make a decision, then that's probably doesn't speak well for the future of Myles Turner beyond this season or, even beyond February as an Indiana Pacer. So overall, I've been underwhelmed. I don't think his play has been noticeably bad, but clearly it's been down a tick because, the numbers don't lie and they're down in the areas you don't want them to be down and they're up in the areas you don't want them to be up.
So here's my thesis on the two things that are making it feel worse than it is to me. And that is two stats that one you mentioned, one you didn't. One is the turnovers. It is like not just like a few more, like it's a lot more turnovers this year for Myles Turner, which is really perplexing. Like it's kind of entry passes. It's kind of just bad handles. Maybe some got figured out in his game. 2.8 per 36. He's never been over 2 before. His turnover percentage, like as a percentage of his possessions this year, is about 16%. It's never been higher than 11.6. Like, wow. That's crazy. It's a really remarkable how much that's gone up. And I need to really dive into every single one of them to see like what is the sloppiness leading to that? Because if you told me before the season started, hey, 2 months into the year, Myles Turner's going to be taking 5 threes again, making 41.1%, I'd be like, wow, he must be having an awesome season. And he's not. And so part of it is that his touches are ending with just the worst possible outcome for a possession quite often. The other thing is he's currently having his worst 2-point percentage, and Sabonis was on the team. His worst effective field goal percentage, and Sabonis on the team. His worst 2-point percentage since the year they traded for Oladipo, right? Like his inside the arc play. And this is what a lot of people's criticism of him was for a while. And then when he finally got better and looked awesome these last 2 years, he really upped his, I'd say 10 feet and in, 15 feet and in, abilities, and his finishing at the rim has been good this year. 75%, 0 to 3 feet. That's like exactly what the last couple years have looked like. But in the paint and on like mid-range shots, he's been a mess compared to recent seasons. That little Dirk fadeaway he was hitting like once a game vanished. Floaters aren't dropping at all. And so what that leads to is 2 or 3 extra possessions every game between the turnovers and those misses where it's like, dang, what was that? Like I've seen him make that before. Or I've never seen him turn it over like that before. And that just cumulatively for a guy that we've watched for 10 years has become like, we're not used to this. And I don't mean that to excuse anything. I mean that to say you're not used to it because he was better than this last year by a good amount. Last year was one of his best seasons ever. And so on one hand, I almost feel like he has the resume to me to say maybe these mid-range shots will just start going in. The threes probably won't as much as they have, but maybe these shots in the inside the arc will just start to fall and we'll say, oh, that looks more normal. But the turnovers are really perplexing, and the defense has just never been where it was since, I don't know, the bubble maybe would be a good time to say that decline start. And so he's still a good player. He proved he can perform in the playoffs last year. He fits the way the Pacers play. Him and Haliburton are a good screen roll partnership. But I still think he's a good center and fits the Pacers very well. I'm not suggesting a change of any kind, but I do agree that even though I've felt better about his performances than just about every fan, there is something going on a little different, and it's felt worse than the last 2 years when he looked really good. And it's kind of on him to clean some of that stuff up, even though I still think he's a good starting center and a good fit for the team. I feel bad that I have to caveat everything with him, but you know how fans get with Myles Turner for some reason. I don't get it. It's just him.
Yeah, it's been really one of the most unique runs in indie sports history for an individual, like since I've been around, honestly, because there have been so many sagas and chapters, and think about all of the crap that Myles Turner has lived through with this franchise over 10 years. I mean, 10 years feels like 100 with all of the different iterations of the Pacers, and God, they did a jersey change.
Can I give you my craziest Myles Turner with the Pacers stat?
Yeah,
I could not legally drink during his Pacers debut.
Oh my God! Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Actually, one of my my favorite Myles Turner story is I went to his workout, and Frank Kaminsky was there.
TJ McConnell as well.
That's what I'm getting. And I was there, and Mark Monteith can vouch for me here, where we're watching the workout. There were other media people there as well. I think Trisha Whitaker might have just gotten to town. Well, I mean, she was from IU, but she had come from Green Bay, and she had just gotten the job at 59. And we're watching the workout, and it's all about Turner and Kaminsky, and I'm like, oh, do they have like one of the scout team like ball boy guys out there? And Mark's like, no, that's the kid from Arizona. And I'm like, he's working out for like an NBA contract. Like they think he's going to get drafted. And here we are 10 years later, and he's on the, and Frank Kaminsky's like a washout. Right. And TJ McConnell's a good NBA player, and Myles Turner's had a great career, but yeah, it's a long time for sure. We've seen just this year in general, like I know people want, this is a daily Pacers podcast, right? And you have to come and you have to have takes and you have to speak like definitively about stuff. It's just so hard to do because these seasons, things change and grow and evolve. Yes. And guys go through slumps and they miss shots. And why are they missing shots? I don't know. They're just missing shots. And then they start making shots. And you know what I mean? And I know that your analysis goes far deeper than, and Caitlin Cooper's analysis goes far deeper than this, but some of it is just, it's just variance during the course of an 82-game season. And some of these things could correct. In a month from now, Myles Turner's numbers could look a lot better. But as of right now, I think it's fair to be mildly disappointed with what he's been overall through the first, 2.5 months of the season.
I would also like to encourage a course correction on Myles Turner expectations from a scoring perspective, not because of his efficiency. He needs to make more shots, to what you just said, but because he's going to shoot less if Mathurin keeps starting. Like, it's just how the offense is going to flow if it's Mathurin instead of Nesmith. So if he's taking less shots, he's going to score fewer points. I don't need to explain that part to people. But yeah, that's a good way of putting it. And you said it, so I can do this now. Congratulations to TJ McConnell. Who would have thought you'd be a Ring of Honor guy when he was fighting through the pre-draft process that year? And
yeah.
10 years in the
Nuts.
pros is, there's like different ways. Apparently at Arizona, you can qualify for their Ring of Honor. Mathurin was an all-pro or an all-conference. So I forget what it was. Conference player of the year, maybe. I forget. Whatever. He accomplished something so grand at Arizona that he got in. And then McConnell got it on NBA tenure. I think that's like the most TJ McConnell way to get it. Also on congratulations, Dave Calabro, 32 years. Unbelievable run. I've done many a TV hit with him. This is only sort of Pacers related, but they were all Pacers TV hits. Indy legend, retirement. Congratulations, Dave Calabro.
Yeah, just the absolute nicest guy. And it's sad for me. I mean, we're talking about how old we are now because Myles Turner's been in the league for a decade. But, Dave first now with IndyCar, right, in the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, he was the sports director at 6 for 20 whatever years. Dave for 32 years. AC has been at 8 since I've been in town. Chris Hagan's been at 59 since Y2K. So, all those guys I was used to just being mainstays, and now half of them have either moved on to retirement or other things. I guess Calabro and First can hang out together. But yeah, I mean, Dave and the hair and the voice, I'm not going to try to do the impression, even though everybody does a Dave Calabro impression. A wonderful guy. And his contributions will be missed. I think he's glad to get out. It's changed a lot. Sports TV since 1992 when he entered, but a great guy. And congrats to CJ McConnell. It's one thing to be in the Northern Arizona Ring of Honor, but I mean, you're talking about a program. Arizona's a
championship level.
Yeah, if they're not a blue blood, they're a back end top 10 all time level program. And Damon Stoudemire and Richard Jefferson and Steve Kerr. I mean, they've had great players over the years that have come through there. So for him to put his name up there with those guys, I mean, it's incredible.
It's great that the whole team got to go both years. It just like fit into their travel itineraries. So a cool experience for the Pacers, who now have the Suns tomorrow. I'm sure Derek Schultz will be locked in. We'll be talking about it here on Locked On Pacers. The last Pacers Suns game was awesome. Devin Booker had 1 billion points, and the Pacers rallied back from a big deficit to win like 134 to 130. That's how every Pacers game felt last year, maybe.
That was a great crowd, too. That felt like a playoff game. Like, that was an awesome crowd, really engaged. I was there, so I can speak to it.
Yeah, it turns out Kevin Durant draws a lot of fans into the arena. I'm very much looking forward to Pacers Suns, and Tyrese Haliburton, his good Olympic buddy Devin Booker facing off, and to see if the Pacers can actually keep this up. Does this last stretch mean anything? We'll find out on the court when they play tonight in Phoenix. Derek, thank you for the time. My light is so finicky. All I have to do is smack my desk and it breaks. Where can people find you? The things you have to say, not just about the Pacers, but much more frequently about better things like IU football. I'm just kidding. The Pacers are what the show is all about. IU football, the Colts, everything Indiana sports related.
Yeah, at Schultz975 right there. I do the Blue Sky thing, and I'm trying to be more active on there like everybody's doing, but it's hard because the people are still on X. So, I'm trying to do a little bit of both. IBJ columns bi-weekly, so every other week I have one cooking, and we'll have some more Pacer stuff once this disaster of a cold season gets officially
still
done
in
with.
The hunt. Not a disaster, still in the hunt.
Yeah, still in the hunt. Yeah. They got about Myles Turner's turnover percentage chance, I guess, right? It's not great.
Wow.
And then Jake and I every single week, Tuesday, 7:30, IC Sports Network, YouTube, podcast, all that stuff. We're just where you find Locked On Pacers. Just search Query and Schultz, and you can hit us up once a week as well.
The longest running sports duo in town, right? Yes, by far, probably no.
I guess, yeah, by default, really. We took a COVID break when we both got fired. But yeah, outside of that, sure.
No, you don't have to say you got fired. Just say you took a COVID break. That sounds much more reasonable.
It did help me sleep at night for a while to just lie and yeah, blame it on COVID.
We've all done it. Thank you all for listening today. Again, back tomorrow talking Pacers Suns, whatever happens there. If it's less eventful, I've got some cap geekery I can always throw in there. See you tomorrow, everybody. Thanks for listening. Take care. Enjoy. If you don't listen to this after Pacers Suns, enjoy IU Notre Dame.